What's happening to property prices? Around the country, a lot of properties barely keeping up with inflation, but there is an enclave, and particularly enclaves within the enclave of Cape Town in the Western Cape, which seems to be outperforming. According to the Pam Golding Residential Property Index, the Western Cape is the hottest regional housing market, registering double-digit increases of over 10% in property prices in the fourth quarter of last year. But it's not just last year. National house price inflation began to accelerate and record an average increase of 7% during the first quarter of this year. That's keeping up with inflation. But again, it happens in segments and it happens in particular areas. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight joined by Dr. Andrew Golding, Chief Executive of the Pam Golding Property Group, to talk about property prices amidst a bleak economy in South Africa. It's weird, isn't it? How property prices, particularly in Cape Town, we'll get to drill down into some of the detail, are remaining elevated despite economic growth, which is barely above recession territory.
Yeah, it has certainly surprised us. We keep expecting the market to react to the weak economy, and it just seems to keep going. We are in a sales environment, so we're only as good as our last month, but each month seems to keep going. And pretty much since 2012, we've started to see a recovery which has been sustainable so far.
Interest rates, the uptick hasn't slowed things down?
No, it hasn't yet. We're obviously 2% higher than we were when the market started to move from an interest rate perspective. And we're expecting probably another 2% over the next 12 to 18 months. And so far, that hasn't damped down demand too much as a general view. There are pockets of weakness around the country, but there are also pockets of exceptional strength.
Broadly, it's the category below R1 million, which is actually growing very, very nicely indeed. I mean, property investors could do well, rather than buying the 20 million property in Sandhurst, to buy 21 million rand properties or 750,000 rand properties.
Yeah, so I think the middle of the market, around 2 million, is probably showing the weakest part of our property market. The million rand mark is obviously where the base is at its broadest, where demand is highest, where affordability is highest. And so that has been exceptionally strong. But the top end of the market, which is obviously in very much thinner trade, has also been very strong. And the top end of the South African market is really stretching now. We're talking relatively regularly of properties around 100 million rand.
It's extraordinary.
So there's a big gap between 20 and 100, where traditionally 20 would have been perceived to be the top end of the market. But I think in many markets around the world, we're seeing the top end, which in our case is around 20, and then this uber prime market, which is now stretching to 50, 70, 100.
Jeremy Gardner at Investec Asset Management has got a fantastic presentation, and he likes to play property, he likes to play Monopoly when he does his presentations. And he says to you, you look at what 10 million rand buys you in London, and it's almost like a studio apartment in Chelsea. That same 10 million rand buys you half an acre in Constantia, buys you this in Durban, buys you this in Joburg, and he does various other comparisons. Globally, we're still on the cheap side in terms of square meterage and build quality and what you get. Unquestionably.
So, I think we generally work on a rule of thumb of 1/10 of comparable prices, whether that's New York, London or Tokyo. And I think the savvy international investor looks at the likes of a Cape property, whether that's a Clifton property or a gentleman's estate out in the Boland and Overberg, and says, I'm getting incredible value here for my hard currency. By the same token, high net worth South Africans are taking the same view, that in actual fact their asset is tradable in world terms when one compares the best of the best in South Africa with the best of the best in Saint-Tropez or New York.
I mean, there'll be lots of people watching the show tonight who've got 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 million rand, which they are looking to apply. They're looking at 16 to the dollar, they're looking at 23, 24, quarter to the pound, and they're going, I just can't do that. I mean, it may get worse, but history shows us that, when common sense eventually does prevail, things do come down to greater equilibrium. Are you seeing that money that might have left the country, say a year ago, maybe being diverted into South African property assets?
Yeah, I think there's certainly an element of that. I think we've seen that in Zimbabwe to some extent, where Harare property has held up remarkably well.
Have you got Pam Golding in Harare?
Very much so.
And you've had it throughout the
last
the years.
20 years.
And how's that cycle changed?
Yeah, so the property market in Harare has held up extremely well, and people have seen property and residential property as a safe haven. And I think we're seeing that in South Africa to some extent as well. The Atlantic seaboard in South Africa has averaged 25% growth year on year.
But every time we talk about this, it can't possibly be sustained. And you go, yes, it can.
And it keeps going.
It does keep going.
Yeah.
And those dynamics, what is the old line? You've got to buy real estate because they ain't making any more of it.
Yeah,
and there's a very thin band that you can build up the mountain before it becomes nature reserve, and it's getting full as you get towards Llandudno and Howe Bay.
Yeah, and I think we've seen worldwide that statistics are showing that where cities have no real room to move, Cape Town being an example because of the geographic constraints, property prices do continue to rise.
But are we seeing developers come to terms with the new dynamics? I mean, we've got Baldwin Properties, for example, which seem to be doing very nicely, building compact but well-priced units in terms of what the market is demanding in South Africa. Are you getting a good supply coming through?
I think so. I think there was a time post-2007 when there was doom and gloom, where developers literally sat on their hands. There were no plans being approved. There were no real big developments coming through. But we've started to see in the last 5 years or so a number of large developments coming through and catering for all types of the market. So we've just launched a property in Bantry Bay recently now, which is on the market at 100,000 Rand a square metre.
Sorry. This table would be worth 400 or 500,000 Rand. I mean, that's the scale of what we're talking about.
So that's the best of the best, aiming to be the best
Top
of
quality,
the best.
just like this.
Top quality, just like this. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got developers who are looking to bring affordable product to the market, aiming for, as I say, the broad base of that pyramid, and achieving really good prices and where there's significant capital growth.
Location, location, location.
Always.
Not all of Cape Town is flying, but the pockets of excellence, the City Bowl area of Cape Town is doing very well, that Atlantic seaboard area is doing very well. That's the easy sell done. What are we seeing in other big hubs, the Durbans, the Joburg?
So I think we're seeing the same sort of thing where there are pockets of excellence and where those trends are changing. So I think it's common cause that in Durban, for example, the old top end of the Durban market in the city environment around the city centre has long since moved out north. And so you're seeing areas like Umhlanga, the new Sibaya node as an example, where traditionally that wouldn't have been that desirable, is now very much the top end, talking about it being the Clifton of KZN, and close to the airport, and offering all sorts of amenities around that new Durban North Umhlanga node.
At what point does Pam Golding Properties set up an office in downtown Joburg to look at this rejuvenation? There's an extraordinary amount of, again, isolated pockets of developers going in and rejuvenating single buildings. And the next thing, 2 single buildings, and now you've got a neighborhood. And it's still not to everybody's taste, but a lot of people, South Africans, are moving into the center of Johannesburg. Gautrain's making things better from a commuter perspective. There is a buzz.
No question about it. We're very excited about downtown South Africa generally. We think that there's huge urban regeneration opportunities. Johannesburg's clearly leading the way. The Maboneng project is an example. Where we've been surprised at the extent to which international investors have come in and taken a view around wanting to be in the cultural heat of Johannesburg downtown. And I think it's fantastic.
There was a time, probably 10 or 12 years ago, when we should all have listened to you, and you were marketing a lot of London property at 11, 12 to the pound, and these 100,000, 200,000 pound flats were on the market. Those properties would have done incredibly well over the last decade. I still see in your advertising your partnership with Savills. You're still doing some of it. Is there much demand?
Very much so. There's still appetite. It's become incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
So we're marketing something called Chelsea Barracks at the moment, which is R1 million a square metre. And
that's 10 times more than Bantry Bay.
Which is 10 times.
This table's just gone up in value.
Which is 10 times more than Bantry Bay, which is the top end of the South African market. Admittedly, that is the top end of the London market. Yeah. So there still is huge appetite for South Africans to buy in London. There just is limited affordability these days. It's
so
just
where
gone through
are
the roof.
smart South Africans offshoring property investment? We've seen lots of opportunities, and you market some of those in Mauritius, for example. Lots of attractive Gulf estate sort of developments there because the Mauritians control where foreigners can and can't build. That's been interesting. Anything else?
So Mauritius and the Seychelles have been very good. I think that's been off the back of potential residency opportunities. We've been marketing Portugal extensively and been surprised at the extent to which South Africans have been interested in the Golden Visa program there. Many other South Africans are looking further afield. So Berlin is an interesting market from a rental perspective where there are really good rental yields. Miami is very much the flavor of the month in terms of America. Miami is absolutely a cultural hotspot at the moment in terms of architecture and art. And so South Africans are buying 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in Miami. There are places in Eastern Europe which are attractive. So I think, you know, there is a global village out there, and South Africans are looking for all sorts of things for different reasons, whether it's places where their kids can be educated, it's a nest egg to retire to. The traditional areas of Italy and France are also still attractive. We still sell a number of properties to South Africans in Italy or France.
But I mean, again, the French property regulation is insane for foreigners. One's got to understand the jurisdictions. You've got to understand the T's and C's of what you're buying into.
So.
I mean, they're countries are very, very different from that respect.
Yes, I mean, those conditions are onerous, and one has to be prepared to go through the twists and turns of buying a property in France, but at the end of the day, ultimately ending up with, in many cases, your dream property.
If you're somebody who doesn't like a home affairs queue at 8 o'clock in the morning, don't bother going to buy French property.
There's a fair amount of red tape.
Like that. A bit like it. But again, there are wondrous opportunities around the world. Growth prospects for South Africa, the vast majority of us, if we're lucky enough to own a home in this country, of course, it forms a very substantial part of a family's value. Prospects remain okay?
Yeah, so I think so. Notwithstanding the relatively bleak economic outlook, we're still optimistic about the property market. We're optimistic that house price growth will continue to be just above inflation from the point of view of the overall market. But within that, significant pockets of excellence where certainly double-digit house price growth we think is genuinely sustainable.
How is the Airbnb market driving things in Cape Town? I spoke to the people at Airbnb the other day. They said 20,000 South African rooms are available on Airbnb. 10,000 of them in Cape Town. And you hear of these Airbnb entrepreneurs who are buying 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in the city bowl of Cape Town. Some of them are even making money.
We've certainly seen an uptick in speculative buying of off-plan and new property developments of that sort of nature. So
and you've seen this movie before. Does it scare you a bit?
Well, I think the speculative component is always a bit scary. As long as it's sort of under 10% of people buying, I think it's okay. I think it got out of hand pre-2007. But if the Airbnb model is sustainable, then certainly that accommodation will be rented out. And from that perspective, those speculators will get a return.
Okay. Hopefully the return is enough to cover the bond. Dr. Andrew Golding, Chief Executive of the Pam Golding Property Group. More stories to defy economic trends and the doom and gloom which surrounds us all the time nowadays. There is a good story to tell. Till next time on the MoneyMakers, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.